Should witches really avoid magic during a lunar eclipse? So, you may have heard that eclipse energy is too chaotic or too unpredictable to work with, but is this actually a real rule of traditional witchcraft? So, with the lunar eclipse arriving later this week alongside the full moon, we're going to be looking tonight at where this idea and this warning comes from, whether there's really a reason to fear eclipse energy, and also what the full moon is actually good for. So, welcome. I'm Aislin, Merry Meet. This is Ask Aislin. Tonight, we are here talking about full moon magic during a lunar eclipse and what you need to know. So if you're with us here live, say hi in the chat. Let us know that you are here. As always, there will be a Q&A at the end. You can leave your questions and comments in the feed. I'll be watching the feed as we go, but I'll also be answering the major questions at the end. And of course, leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed, and that helps us get this out to more people. So let's dive in. There's a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to be talking about this actual eclipse that's happening alongside the full moon later this week, and we're also going to be dispelling some myths and just giving you the information that you need in order to choose what kind of magic you're going to do. So let's talk about this full moon that's coming up. So there is a full moon happening this week. It is between Thursday and Friday of this week. So the 27th to the 28th, and depends on which time zone you are in. So it will peak, the full moon will peak at 9:18 p.m. Pacific on Thursday night, and that would be 12:18 a.m. Eastern the following morning. So it's really the peak of this is really if you are to the west of the Atlantic, it's really like late Thursday night. If you are in Europe or to the east of the Atlantic, then this would be like early Friday morning or even further into Friday daytime. So Friday for most of the world, but Thursday night for most of the US. So if you have spent much time in witchy places online, you may have heard people talking about some various versions of don't manifest during an eclipse, don't charge your crystals during eclipse, don't make moon water during an eclipse, don't cast any spells during an eclipse, or people may say eclipse energy is just too chaotic or unpredictable to do any of those things. But what I'd like to do tonight in this episode is answer the question, is that really a traditional rule of witchcraft? So I've been practicing witchcraft for over 30 years. And for most of that time that I've practiced, I've never heard anyone say anything about warnings regarding an eclipse. It's really only in the last 4 or 5 years when I started my business and started this social media presence that I started to see people acting as though that was some kind of an established rule. So my question then became, where did that idea come from? Is there really substantive evidence to back that up? So by the end of this episode, you're going to know some of the research that I have done. You are going to understand what the full moon is, what it's actually good for, and what it represents in the lunar cycle. You're going to know what kinds of magic align to the work well and align with the full moon. You are going to understand why releasing isn't necessarily the most primary correspondence of a full moon. And you're also going to understand more about the eclipse and what an eclipse actually changes for us when it comes to the full moon energy and whether you need to avoid magic during that time. So by the time we're done with this episode, you'll have all of that information and then you'll be able to decide for yourself whether the eclipse is something that you want to avoid or something you want to lean into. So we're actually going to start by talking about the full moon in general, and then we'll get into the what does it mean to have a full moon during a lunar eclipse more specifically. Now, to start, what happens during a full moon? Well, physically, what happens during the lunar cycle? So let's just start there. So during a new moon, the moon is directly between the earth and the sun. So there's no illumination. And I actually heard something kind of interesting, and I wish I could remember who said this. Because it was in the past week or so, and we were talking about, oh, should witches really fear Magick at an eclipse, and someone was saying, well, if you think about it, a new moon has an energy of an eclipse anyway. It's you have the moon between the earth and the sun, and this is why we don't see any illumination. So just kind of an interesting thought that this person's like, well, that energy actually happens every single month, right? Now, as the moon begins to wax, there's an increasing illumination. So at first we only see that little sliver, right? A few days after the full moon, and then we start seeing more and more of the light, and then eventually we come to the full moon. And then the earth at that point is between the sun and the moon, which means that the moon is opposite the sun in the sky, and then you have total illumination. So you will see, over that course of those about 14 days from new moon to full moon, you'll see that side that's illuminated getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually it's full, right? So then as we start to move into the waning half of the cycle, the illumination starts to decrease, and you start to see it little by little, and then eventually it seems like it's going faster and faster. And then at the very end of the lunar cycle, you have the dark moon, which is the day right before the new moon. And you'll have no illumination. And then technically the very first day of the cycle, there's just the smallest little bit of light. So here's the question, though. That's all the physical, that's the astronomy part of it for those who are interested. But what really does the full moon mean when we're looking at it from a spiritual or a magical perspective? So we can think about the metaphor of the full moon and think about what's happening in the lunar cycle. And this is where I always like to start when we're trying to think about, what correspondences make sense for certain things. Like to me, correspondences aren't about just memorizing a bunch of things that relate to other things. It's about thinking about where they have come from, right? So think about, for example, the herb cinnamon. And many people will say that, the herb cinnamon is connected to the fire element, and it's connected to accelerating things and prosperity. And if you think about it, cinnamon is a spicy herb, so it makes sense, right? So when we think about the metaphor of the full moon, well, what is happening at the full moon? The full moon is illuminated fully. So we see the face of the full moon in a way that we have not seen at other parts of the lunar cycle. So something is growing to its fullest expression, right? Like the face of the full moon, something is growing to its fullest expression. The cycle has reached the peak of its energy. Something is illuminated just like the face of the full moon. So you can kind of think about this in your own practice when you're thinking about correspondences and how to work with the full moon. Well, that's really what the physical energy is showing us. And then these are the symbolic and kind of metaphorical meanings underlying it, right? What was developing is now visible, right? So through the beginning of the lunar cycle, something was developing, the face of the full moon, and now it is visible. The moon reaches its peak power, so we talked about that one. So I really think that the primary full moon correspondences, and these are the ones that you'll see in many witchcraft books, are culmination, so kind of the culmination of some kind of an energy, illumination, illuminating something in your life, amplification because it is the kind of peak energy of the cycle, and fulfillment because it is like the peak. It is the highest point of the cycle. In a lot of ways, I've talked about this in other episodes. If you lay like the solar cycle over the lunar cycle, the full moon is kind of like Litha, summer solstice, when the energy of the sun is also thought to be at its greatest height. So I would probably also add to that list of kind of symbolic correspondences that align with the energy of the full moon. I would add celebration. I think that the full moon is also an excellent time for us to celebrate and to recognize the things that have come to fruition in our lives. Now, the reality is that every lunar phase has its own energetic quality. So while the full moon is the peak of illumination, it doesn't mean that the full moon is better than other parts of the lunar cycle. And it also doesn't mean, and I've heard people say this sometimes, and so this is a myth that I would definitely want to dispel here. So I've heard people say, well, the full moon is the strongest moon, so that means that anything you do at the full moon is stronger. And I think that is a myth to dispel. Each part of the lunar cycle has its own place in the cycle. and they're each unique and they're each used for different things. So what type of magic makes most sense at the full moon? So now we're going to go deeper into those kind of themes of illumination, celebration. What were the other ones I said? Amplification and culmination and fruition. But before we do that, I want to pause and just say hi to those who are joining us live. So welcome everybody. So Mary Meet, Jenny and Andrea. Mary Meet. Andrea says so excited for this episode. Mary Meet, Glitter, great to see you. And Debbie's here. Welcome. Um, so let's see here. So Andrea said, well, I'm going to be a rebel. I will do all those things. And yeah, what we're going to see, at the end of all of this is that I don't think there's anything to fear. So for those who are nervous about a full moon eclipse, I'm hoping by the end of this you'll feel less nervous, but you'll also kind of know from your own energy how to tell what to do at a lunar eclipse. Mary Meet to Cindy, Mary Meet. Andrea said, kind of like those people who say you can't buy your own tarot deck. Absolutely, right? Some of the worst tarot decks I've ever had were ones that people bought for me, and some of the best ones were ones I bought for myself. At the end of the day, magic, witchcraft, your path is your path. It's up to you to kind of carve out and find the path that works for you. But I think it's really important to dispel some of the myths that we see. Like sometimes, like I said, I've been practicing for over 30 years, really only hit the kind of social media scene of witchcraft about 4 or 5 years ago when I started the business. And then I started to see these things and I was like, I don't understand where that's coming from. It was never in the liturgy or any of the books that I read, not from any of the witches who were older, who had practiced longer than me. They never said anything like that. So hopefully we'll dispel some of those myths tonight. Debbie said, I feel more of my divine feminine energy under the full moon. Yeah, absolutely. The lunar cycle in general is connected to the divine feminine. Remember, feminine and masculine energy has nothing to do with gender. It's just two kinds of energies, and so yes, it's common for people to feel like more feminine energy regardless of their gender at that time. This could be why people like dance under the full moon. Dancing is a very like divine feminine energy. Yeah. And Glitter said, I've never had any issue at all with it. Yeah, exactly. So witches who practice for a long time, they're like, well, I've never had any trouble with any of this. So especially for those of you guys who are newer, you're going to learn sort of where some of these myths have come from, and then we'll dispel some of them here. Okay, so let's dive in. Before we get into kind of more about the eclipse, let's talk about those themes of the full moon. So the first one, illumination, right? That one makes a lot of sense. Probably it's the most natural correspondence to understand because the moon is fully illuminated, its face turned towards us. Many people, like even people who aren't witchy, will comment, oh God, look at the moon, look at the full moon. It's so illuminated, it's so beautiful, right? As we start going up to getting closer to the full moon. So even this whole week, or even the end of last week, people would say, oh, look at the moon. My friend yesterday, she's not a witch, but he was like, oh, look at the moon. It's a full moon. I said, oh, no, that's not till Thursday or Friday. But the point is, it's becoming more and more illuminated and it's more and more noticeable by people. So because the moon is more illuminated, it makes a full moon a good time for divination, right? Because things are clearer. It makes it a good time for asking for clarity. So asking the moon, asking your guides, asking your higher self, asking your deities you work with for more clarity. Uncovering something that has been hidden. So if there's something that you have been missing, this can be a good time to ask for that to be uncovered. Whether that's something you're missing physically, or maybe just something you're not seeing in your, your day-to-day life, or in your psychological world, or in your mental one. Recognizing patterns, again, because of that illumination, this light shines down on things and makes them more clear. Gaining greater awareness around a situation. So in some ways, we talk about like, oh, shadow work is very common at the end of the cycle as the moon gets darker, and that is absolutely true. But it's not uncommon for people to all of a sudden have kind of spontaneous shadow work sessions during the full moon because of that idea. There's greater awareness. Patterns are becoming more visible during a full moon. And the full moon can also be a good time to build your intuition because that energy is more clear. There's more clarity during that time. So, a question when it comes to sort of illumination is, what can I see now that I couldn't see during earlier parts of the cycle? So that's something for you to think about. Maybe if you like to journal or pull some cards around it, it could be a good question for you during your full moon working or practice or whatever you do. What can I see now that I couldn't during earlier parts of the cycle? So that moves us then to amplification. So because the full moon is the peak of the cycle, doesn't mean it's better than other parts, it's just the peak of its energy. It can strengthen existing spell work. So this is where the idea of manifesting at the full moon comes from. In fact, manifesting the intentions that you set at the new moon. So, at least in my practice, I usually kind of set the intention at the new moon. You know, this is what I want this cycle to be about. As the waxing energy grows, then my intention grows with it, and then it's strengthened. That intention is strengthened when we get to the full moon, and then maybe I would do some kind of a spell or something to add to it at that time. This is also where the idea of charging magical tools comes from at the full moon, putting your crystals out at the full moon. That's where that idea comes from. Empowering talismans. Maybe people have made tinctures or different things that they want to put out at the full moon to charge it with with that energy. Energy work also is very common at the full moon for that reason, because again, we're at that amplified peak of power of the moon. Increasing things in your life, increasing confidence, increasing creativity, psychic awareness, or anything that you'd want to increase or have more of in your life. Essentially, it's amplifying something that is already underway. Now, another theme of the full moon is culmination and fruition. So here would be a question for you also to think about in your practice. What am I ready to bring into fruition? So is there something in your life that's kind of been building? Maybe it's been building over various cycles. Maybe it's been building since you set your intention at the new moon. But what do I want to bring to fruition? So the full moon energy will support completing something. So maybe there's something that you started, maybe got stuck somewhere along the way. Full moon energy can help you move that forward. This is also why people will feel like more energy at the full moon. I think this is too why there's like stories of and actually real data to support. There's more accidents at the full moon. There's more hospital admissions, especially there's more ER visits at the full moon. It's just there's more energy. If you drive around, I always tell people be a little cautious when you're driving on the full moon, because people are just a little crazier than usual because they're feeling that kind of amplified energy. The full moon also supports bringing a project or an intention towards its fulfillment, celebrating your progress, and also recognizing your results. So it can be a good time to take stock of what has happened. I think what's also very interesting, I didn't actually have this in my notes, but it's something I'm feeling called to talk about here because I've talked about it in other episodes, is that if you kind of look at the full moon, so for example, and look at the sign of the full moon. So for example, the sign of this full moon is Pisces. So if you look at that and then you count back 6 months and you go and you find when the new moon was in Pisces, and it's usually about 6 months before the full moon is in Pisces, then examine what was happening in your life at that time and then see if anything is coming to completion now that you started 6 months ago. It's kind of an interesting exercise to do. You can just Google when was the new moon in Pisces 2026, and you get the date, and then it'll give you something to think about. So kind of a cool exercise to do. And then the fourth intention of the full moon, or fourth kind of theme I wanted to talk about, was celebration and gratitude. Because I think, in modern magic is very goal oriented. There's nothing wrong with that. We are kind of as the human species has evolved, we become more goal oriented. But so the full moon is always about, manifestation, healing, maybe some shadow work a person might be doing, fixing things, finding things, illuminating things, right? It's about doing things, goals. But the moon can just simply be honored, and you don't have to do anything at all, but simply honor and celebrate the full moon. And you can celebrate the full moon without having any outcome attached to it at all if you don't want to. So sometimes we feel like, I'm going to talk a little bit later about all the doing, and we sometimes can feel stressed about that. And sometimes just a simple honoring the full moon, honoring the moon goddess can be enough. Okay, so I wanted to talk about releasing at the full moon. Is the full moon really about releasing? So this is something I've seen people talk about as well. So when I started practicing over 30 years ago, I never saw this anywhere in the liturgy about releasing at the full moon. Now, that's not to say that you can't, and I'm going to strongly emphasize that here. Again, remember, your practice is your practice, and what you feel called to is the right way to do witchcraft for you. But I wanted to look at, like, where does that idea come from? Does the energy really support it? And maybe is there a different way to think about releasing the things that have come to light during the full moon? So if you've been doing your releasing work at the full moon, again, I'm absolutely not saying that anything is being done wrong. But I think it is important to understand the energetics of the cycle, right? So I think this may be why people will sometimes talk about releasing at the full moon. So something reaches culmination, right? That's the energy of the full moon. It becomes visible. So something's becoming visible in your life. We recognize that thing that's becoming visible, and we may also recognize that we're finished with it. And then we want to release it, right? So that makes psychological sense, absolutely. But if we are specifically looking at the lunar energy that is attached to this part of the cycle, there's another way to think about it. So the moon doesn't begin to diminish until after the full moon is over. Honestly, as soon as the full moon hits its peak, you are technically in the waning half of the cycle. So releasing at the full moon, if you are doing releasing at the full moon, this would be something to think about. Are you doing it before the full moon actually hits its peak, or are you doing it after the full moon hits its peak? Because after the full moon hits its peak has a little bit more, makes a little bit more sense energetically. So we can think about it this way. At the full moon, I see it, right? Okay, so then, but let's think about, the cycle in general. At the full moon, I see it. At the waning moon, I start to reduce it, or I start to move away from it. During the balsamic or dark moon, I end it, I release it, I clear it, and then at the new moon, I begin again. So magic for releasing may have a better fit at the waning or even at the dark moon energy. Dark moon energy is good for banishing, it's good for breaking habits, reducing an unwanted influence. This is actually all of the waning energy in general. Reducing an unwanted influence, doing cord cuttings, doing endings, and doing deep release. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do a cord cutting during the waxing half of the cycle. Again, lunar correspondences are tools. They're never going to be laws. So there's nothing that says you can't do a love spell in the waning half of the cycle. There's nothing that says you can't do banishing in the waxing half. There's nothing that says you can't do releasing at the full moon. But I just think it's important to always remember the energetic. So we just kind of think about, like, what am I aligning my energy to, right? So if you feel called to do your releasing at the full moon, you aren't going to break the moon. So I wanted to make that very clear. But just so that you have the energetics of the full moon. And if it were me, if I was going to do releasing at the full moon, I would probably look at where the peak of the energy is. And you can find that on any full moon calendar, or any moon calendar for that matter. And then I would just do that releasing as soon as the peak is over, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's also talk about the idea of you don't have to do all the full moon things. So this is another. I know the people who follow me. I know you guys love to do a lot of things, and sometimes it can feel really overwhelming. And sometimes when people fall out of their practice, they fall out of their practice because they feel overwhelmed. And so as a witch, we want to make sure that we're not overwhelmed, and there's small ways to do practice, right? So if you spend a lot of time on social media, you may see people passing around full moon checklists. And I will often post posts and they say, well, what are you doing for the full moon? And here's some ideas. And by no means do we ever mean you have to do all of those things. But sometimes people feel like, oh, I've got to do all of this. I got to put my crystals out. I got to put out my moon water. I got to cleanse my house and my space. I've got to do my tarot spread. I've got to do a journal entry. I've got to do spell work. I've got to do a ritual. I've got to call my deities. And then the full moon starts to feel like work, like homework that you have to do, right? So working with the lunar cycles is not about all the stuff that you do. It's about developing a relationship with the cycle and with the lunar energy, and honestly with your own energy too. It's kind of following and tracking your own cycles. It is about developing a rhythm and a relationship with the rhythm of the full moon, and a relationship with the rhythm of yourself. It's not about completing a monthly checklist or doing all these things. So, on some cycles, you may find that all that you have the time and the energy for is to step outside and bless the moon and say hello. And that's enough, and you don't have to feel guilty about it. And I say this because I actually find myself feeling guilty too. Like usually I do these big elaborate rituals and I go to the beach and I have all my candles and and most of the time I love doing that. But this cycle, I have a lot going on. I'm having to get some stuff to a web developer. I'm getting ready for my trip to Boston and my presentation I'm doing there. And I don't know where to fit in this trip to the beach and the full moon. So I started to feel guilty about this the other day. And then I'm like, well, that's not the point. It isn't the point to be feeling guilty. It's like, do what you can do. So it'll feel a lot better for me if I do something smaller here at home. And I'll just go next month, I'll go and I'll do my bigger, elaborate ritual. So I say this to you too, so that you can ease some of your own guilt if you hit cycles where you just don't have a lot of time or energy to do things. Just find something to do. Pull a card, stand out and bless the full moon and say thank you, light a candle, maybe do a short meditation, but you don't have to do all of the things. Remember, there are no rules. And nowhere has the idea of rules around a moon become more noticeable lately than when it comes to the lunar eclipse. So that is what we're going to talk about now. But before we do, I'm just going to jump back into the chat. And so Glitter said sometimes it has to be fast and dirty. And then she said simplicity can be the best tool. Yeah, so sometimes that is exactly what your energy is calling you for. And if we are working to be aligned with the lunar cycles and also be aligned with our own energy, it's about listening to what am I really being called to do right now? And if we instead force ourselves into doing something big and elaborate when we don't have the energy and we don't have the drive and we don't have the time, well, we're really going against our own energy, right? And we're doing the opposite of getting aligned with our energy. So Debbie said, I like making moon water and a meditation during a full moon, but she said, that's just me. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, people will have like a specific practice and that's what they do and it works for them. So for me, I go down to the beach. I generally do like a full ritual. I light my candles. I have a little spell that I do. I give some offerings, and that's what I do most of the time. But on cycles like this, where things are tight, time is tight, I'm going to adapt, and I'm not going to feel guilty for it. And I hope that you guys do too. Okay, so let us now dive in to talk about, the lunar eclipse. Where does some of this come from when it comes to the fear of the lunar eclipse? So let me start by saying, first of all, I'm going to give a little like kind of we're going to talk a little historically about where some of the fears come from, and then we're going to get into like modern day, and and just how to kind of listen to your own energy when it comes time to decide what to do. So I will tell you this. So about 3 or 4 years ago, so this was after I'd probably been on building the social media for a year or two. I remember, some of you who follow me, that I post every time. I post for the dark moon, and I always do a big post for the full moon, and I try to talk about the energetics of that moon and the sign of that moon. And so I posted this post like usual, and a woman got into the comments, and she started just like screaming at me. If you could think of like screaming in social media comments, right? And she tells me that I am irresponsible, and I am reckless, and I'm leading people into danger because I am telling people that they can do magic on the full moon when it's in a lunar eclipse. And I was like, honestly, that was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And so I was like, well, what did I miss over the past 25 plus years? And so, I start going into my books, and there's nothing there. I start doing some research online, and really, honestly, there isn't a lot to find. So let's dive into the research I have discovered, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, that was definitely eye-opening, and I ended up having to eventually block the woman because she just wouldn't let up. And also, I just don't want that kind of energy on our page, because there are many people who are newer. They have been practicing witchcraft for a very small amount of time, and I want them to know truth and not fear and things like that. So let's talk about the eclipse. So where does the fear of the eclipses come from? So you can imagine where this comes from historically, right? So like we don't want to imply that nobody was afraid of lunar eclipses before the rise of TikTok and witch talk, right? Because across various different ancient cultures, eclipses were sometimes interpreted as bad omens, threats to the rulers, to the ruling class, disruptions of cosmic order. Something was attacking or consuming the sun or the moon. So there's stories that, oh, this dragon or this snake is eating the sun, or it's eating the moon, or warnings of political or natural upheaval, or like a warning that some kind of a natural disaster was coming. So the eclipse fear is an ancient fear, and it's a fear that we need to try to understand. Of course, it would be a fear when you don't know the science behind something. It's easy to fear that thing. So there's many things in the modern world that we are not afraid of anymore that people were once afraid of. Even not that long ago, just a few decades ago, when people didn't really know like how HIV would be transmitted, people were like afraid to like hold the hand of someone who had it. We know that that's false now, right? Because we have the science. So things change rapidly when we start to understand the science behind things. So we don't have to continue to carry fears that have been, when they've been illuminated, what's really happening. So while ancient cultures sometimes feared eclipses, that's not the same thing as saying that witches traditionally were not allowed to practice magic during eclipses. And that's the thing that's worth examining here. So where does it come from? Honestly, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's that people feel eclipse energy. It feels it's a bit strange to them. But as I have scoured the internet, as I've looked through books, I did a deep dive into this even like about a year ago, and there's very few texts. Like if you look at modern witches writing about magic, there's very few mentions anywhere in any of the popular books that we read that mention anything about fearing an eclipse or not doing magic or having magic backfire. That's one of the things that people will say, oh, your magic will backfire, or it's going to be the opposite of what you want if it's during an eclipse. And there's really like literally, if you look through the books, there's very little to support that at all. In fact, Llewellyn, who publishes their yearly magical almanac, they've had years where they have actually had an article on doing eclipse magic. In 2012, They explicitly recommended charging tools and drawing on the eclipse energy to charge their tools. And other practitioners have also written positively about eclipse magic. So clearly, this is not one universally accepted rule that everybody has to follow, right? So what does that mean for us? So should you do magic on the lunar eclipse? Should you not do magic on the lunar eclipse? I think this is entirely up to you. So my answer to you is yes, if you want to. I am not afraid of the lunar eclipse. It doesn't change what I do magically. I still go out and I still do my magic. The fact that I'm doing a smaller ritual this cycle has nothing to do with the eclipse. It just has to do with my busy life at this time. So I don't believe that you have anything to fear when it comes to lunar eclipse energy. I don't believe that someone is going to be placing themselves in danger because they've cast a spell during eclipse. I do not believe that your spell will backfire. I don't believe that it will happen the opposite way that you want it to. Um, I have not seen any compelling evidence in witchcraft literature to support the fear. And again, like I said, I've been practicing for 30 plus years. I've probably practiced on almost every full moon across those 30 plus years. I've done lots of magic on eclipses and nothing bad has happened to me. So that doesn't mean, though, that everybody has to work with energy on a lunar eclipse because sometimes people will feel the energy as being more intense. So, like a full moon is already an amplification of energy, and some people feel the energy is even more intense than that when we have a lunar eclipse. It can be more emotionally activating. People might feel more weepy. Sometimes it's too. It's kind of interesting. Like sometimes a lunar eclipse can feel to some people like a dark moon. They're feeling more emotional. They're more weepy. People might feel more distracted during a lunar eclipse. They might feel the energy is chaotic, and it might produce more anxiety in them. That doesn't mean everybody feels that way, but some people might. Now, for those people, it might be better to not do complex spell work when you are feeling that way. That's not because an eclipse is going to make your spell work go horribly wrong. It's just because your energy and your emotional state are what matter most when doing magic. I've been leading rituals for a long time. I remember this time when a person came to a ritual and they hadn't had any sleep and they had had like 6 cups of coffee and their energy was so chaotic that it actually disrupted everybody else's energy. So that was probably not a good time for that person to be practicing magic. It had nothing to do with anything going on outside. It was what was going on inside of them. Same way with if you're sick. Sometimes I've been sick, especially in my younger years of practicing magic, and I'd be like, oh my God, I can't miss the full moon. And then I would push myself to do it. And I just wasn't there energetically. Those are the times to sit magic out or do it at a different time or do something smaller. So same with the eclipse. If you feel this energy and it doesn't feel great to you, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling emotionally activated, then maybe you're not in the best space to be doing the magic right now, right? Not because anything bad is going to happen to you, but because you need to listen to your energy first and foremost. So, for people who, let's say for people who do want to do magic, but also are kind of feeling extra activated, I think it's important to ground your energy beforehand. So, if you don't do grounding work before ritual, definitely an eclipse is time to do that grounding work. Send some grounding cords or roots down from your body into the earth and ground your room or your space where you're doing the ritual as well. Send grounding cords or roots from the 4 corners of the room and see if that helps. Do some centering. Bring your energy into the center of your body, whatever that is. For some people, it's solar plexus. For some people, it's heart. For other people, it's different places. But bring your energy into your center. Slow yourself down. Maybe do some slow breathing. Really get clear about the purpose of the working that you're doing. If you're feeling a little scattered and anxious, check in with your own emotional state and then ground after the practice as well if necessary. Um, So the other thing too is, a person could just simply observe the eclipse and not do magic, and that's okay too. Because remember, the practice is your practice. So choosing not to do magic is perfectly valid, but fear doesn't need to be your reason. So people who do magic on the lunar eclipse, do magic on the lunar eclipse if you want to. There's nothing bad that's going to happen. I promise you, because I've done this for years and years and years and years, and nothing bad has happened. If you feel like you don't want to do magic on the lunar eclipse, then sit that one out, or just do something gentle, or just go outside and watch the eclipse, because it's going to be visible in many places in North and South America, where most of our viewers are. So I hope that that kind of answers some questions. I am going to talk a little bit about, or so I hope that dispels some of the fears or some of the things that you've read and may have been wondering about. Now, we are going to talk just a little bit briefly about what makes the energetics of this particular full moon interesting, and then I will go back to the chat. So, like I mentioned earlier, this full moon is in the sign of Pisces, and the sun is in the sign of Virgo. So specifically, the full moon will be at 5 degrees Pisces and the sun will be at 5 degrees Virgo. So some of the themes of Pisces, well, Pisces is the sign of intuition. It's the sign of imagination, the sign of spiritual awareness, dreams, surrender, and interconnectedness. So if you're looking for sort of a working to do, those are some of the themes specific to Pisces that would be specific to this full moon lunar eclipse. Now, the Virgo themes are more about analysis, discernment, being able to like see and tell the difference from between one thing and another thing, taking practical action. It's an earth-based sign, so organization, routines, and details. And so those two energies are kind of opposite, right? Virgo is very organized and very earth-based, and Pisces is very dreamy and very water-based. And so when they sit opposite one another, they create an interesting dynamic, which will add to the energy of this specific full moon. So here we have intuition versus analysis. So if you're somebody who's been trying to work on your intuition and strengthen your intuition, we know that to strengthen intuition, we have to kind of get out of the analytical mind. So that can be something to play with during this full moon. Surrender versus control. So in Pisces, it's very like flowing and water-like and just surrendering to the energies around you. And then Virgo is a sign that likes to be in control and organized. And so you could think about those two, that dichotomy in your own life. Like where do I need to surrender some of my control? And in what areas of my life do I need to keep that control? It can also be about trusting what you sense versus needing proof. So, Pisces being the watery sign that it is, it's about going with the flow, just trusting the signs and the synchronicities. And then Virgo is very analytical and wants proof. So again, this is a really good, I think this is a good moon for those of you who are kind of either struggling with intuition, struggling with like your self-belief, experiencing imposter syndrome. This is a good moon for you to work through this energy, because those dichotomies of the sun and the moon are basically serving that intention up for you on a platter. So here's a couple of questions for you to think about. If you like reflection questions, again, you can journal. I like to walk around and just contemplate. You can also pull some cards around these questions. So where am I being asked to trust my intuition rather than analyze something endlessly? Okay, so I'll say that one again. Where am I being asked to trust my intuition rather than analyze something endlessly? Here's another one for you. What is becoming clear now that I couldn't see earlier? So that one's just kind of tied to the general eclipse, right? Or general full moon energy, rather. Where do I need more discernment rather than simply going with the flow? So that's sort of the opposite. So sometimes, as we're trying to trust our intuition, we want to just go with the flow, but there are areas of our life where we do need to be discerning and we do need to be more analytical. So I think that closing up here, and then we'll go to the Q&A and the chat. But, remember, the full moon, like anything in your magic, it doesn't need to be another set of rules for you to follow. It's really when you're in lunar energy, like Debbie had mentioned earlier, it's like I feel more connected to my divine feminine. And yeah, that is the energy that we want. And the divine feminine energy flows, and it's fluid, and it's moving, and it's changing. And I think that that's what we want to think about when it comes to our own relationship with lunar energy. We don't need rules. We instead need to listen to our energy, and then we also want to see if we can sense the energy of the stars and the moon and the planet and the earth around us, right? So at the full moon, notice what has reached culmination in your life. Notice what is being illuminated, like what's the veil is being removed from in front of you. Decide if you want to amplify something, if you want to celebrate something, if you want to complete something, or if you want to understand something more clearly. And then that helps guide you towards the theme of your full moon practice or ritual. And then when on Thursdays to Fridays full moon eclipse arrives, don't let somebody else's fear determine your practice or scare you away from what you want to do, right? Because I'm here to tell you, I don't think in the modern day that there's anything that supports that fear. You can work your magic, you could meditate, you could watch the eclipse, or you could go ground and then go to bed. So it's up to you. And remember, your practice is your practice. The important thing is that you make your choice intentionally, and you're not doing something because somebody else told you to. Okay, so I hope that that helps, and that you. So now you have a little better idea of what these full moon energetics are going to be. So I'm going to go back to the chat here, and so let's see here. Um, So let's see here. Anybody have any questions? Go ahead and put them in the chat, and they do not have to be related to shadow, or they do not have to be related to the full moon and the eclipse. It can be related to anything: witchcraft, energy work, shadow work. Um, Glitter said she had come across a site to learn witchcraft. You could learn the secrets of the universe and how to do spells for only a one-time payment of $27.99. Yeah, I mean, sometimes people will sell different things. I wouldn't necessarily say a person could learn all the secrets of the universe for $27.99, right? Um, Okay, so anybody have any questions, put them in the chat. I do have one question that I saw left in the group, and I was going to read that one now and kind of give a little bit of advice on that one. So Candy had said, where do I begin to discover my witchcraft and more? So I think that, if you're newer to witchcraft, I think one of the best things a person can do is stop scouring the internet and all the different sources that are there. Find some trusted sources. This is where I really recommend, go and go to a store. If you could still find a bookstore, or go to a witchy store or spirituality store, browse through some of the books and grab a book on witchcraft. I really highly recommend authors like Raven Grimassi, Christopher Penczak, Scott Cunningham, Starhawk. Grab some books from some of the classic authors, or a book from a classic author, and really dive into that. And I think that will help you to kind of figure out where to begin. Witchcraft is a very large subject, and sometimes people come to it and they're like, I need to know everything all at once. And that's probably, to me, one of the first mistakes people make. I think it's really important to think about what first drew you to witchcraft, and then have that be like the jumping off point. So if a person got drawn to witchcraft because they're interested in herbs, well, Scott Cunningham is an excellent author, because he knows, he's written so much about herbal magic. If a person was first drawn to witchcraft because they want to work with the lunar energy, then find a book about, like, kind of cycling through the lunar cycles and magic for the lunar cycles, and have that be your jumping off point. You don't have to do everything all at once, and I think you'll get further in your path if you kind of start with one sort of maybe start with like a Witchcraft 101 book, and then from there go into like something that you're particularly interested in, and then begin to study that, and then allow your path to open up. So sometimes herbal magic, starts to move people into, okay, now I want to learn about like making tinctures, and or maybe I want to learn more about how to use the lunar cycles in my herbal magic, and then it just starts to lead people down different pathways. So that would be my recommendation. I would try to, like I said, I wouldn't be using ChatGPT to ask questions about witchcraft because it's not always right. I would find trusted sources like books. You can find a lot of great information on our Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel. I will put that link in the chat as well. And there's so many episodes about all kinds of different things related to magic, witchcraft, shadow work, energy work. We also have a course called Demystifying Witchcraft, which is a 13 module course with more modules eventually being added that will teach you the foundations and building blocks of witchcraft. So I would just find something that seems trustworthy, and I would just kind of stick with that thing, and try not to pull from all kinds of different sources all at once. And I hope that helps. If anybody else has any questions, put them in the chat. So Debbie said, would this be a good moon to meditate on knowing outcomes of plans or dispelling fear of outcomes? Yeah, absolutely. I think this would be a great one. I think that any full moon would be good, but in particular with that Pisces Virgo energy that we're going to have going on here, I think that, there is like, sometimes when we put forward plans, there's this part of us that has to like jump in and just move forward. And then there's the part of us that also has to analyze sort of like costs and benefits. Maybe that sometimes that's where the fear will come in, that like paralyzes us from moving forward. But I think this would be a great one to kind of meditate. I would ask the kind of lunar energy, or if you work with a deity or your higher self or anything like that, or your guides, just ask them to sort of like unveil or bring you clarity into the outcomes of your plans. Let's see. Andrea said, do you have a good tarot spread you like for a full moon eclipse? Not a particularly, not one I can think of off the top of my head, but I will see if I can find a good one, and then I will post it in the group. And then for those watching back on YouTube, I'll try to post it in the comments as well. It's a good question. Yeah. But I do think that like just kind of making one up here on the fly, you could ask like, so if we were doing this specifically for Pisces and Virgo, we could be asking questions about, where in my life, like in what area of my life do I need to like let go and go with the flow and like really embrace the Pisces energy? And then pull another card, like in what area of my life do I need to be more analytical? And then that taps more into that Virgo energy. You could also ask like traditional, like kind of lunar eclipse questions would be like, what is being illuminated, for one card, and then what is like obscured from my view? Because, we do have like for that moment that the eclipse is, when the shadow of the earth is across the moon, then something is obscured for that moment, but then it's within a few hours it's clear again. So it could be a good time to ask, like, what is obscured from my view, and what do I need to do in order to see that more clearly. Glitter said Buckland. Raymond Buckland also is a good author for anybody starting out. He's got his Big Blue Book of Witchcraft is a great one for beginners and for people who have been practicing for a long time. It's a cool book to go back and read again. And Thrift Books has some great prices on books, some of these books as well. You don't always have to just get them on Amazon. Thrift Book is a great place to try as well. Okay. If I missed any questions here, I'll go back. I think I got them all that people had asked. But if I missed any, I'll go back later and I'll answer any questions I missed. And if you are watching back in replay, feel free to put your questions in the chat too. I always go back after we upload the video and I answer anything I didn't answer during the live. Let's talk about what's coming up. That'll give you a chance if you wanted to ask any other questions. You have some time to put them in the chat. So coming up, so next week is 8/1, and I'm not entirely sure there's going to be a live episode yet. I'm going to be in Boston. I had plans of maybe streaming live from there, but it may become more complicated than I thought it was, so I may be skipping 8/1. Sorry, 9/1, not 8/1, 9/1. But I will be back with a brand new episode on 9/8, and that episode is going to be about triple goddess. We're going to be looking at kind of the goddess archetype split into the triple goddess, what the triple goddess means, how to work with that energy, and then I believe the following week we're going to do an episode on the god, dark god and light god, and those archetypes. So those are going to be some good episodes. People always seem to really like the episodes on deities. We do have some announcements coming up as far as the Shadow Seekers membership. We are going to be enrolling people very soon. We're putting the finishing touches on the websites, and we're going to be unveiling that soon. I plan probably near the end of September or very early October. There will be some kind of a free workshop to kick it all off, and then we'll have some special deals, for those who are joining at that time. Um, we also have our Demystifying Witchcraft course that will be coming as well, because we're working on that website, and that is that's gonna kick off sometime in October, just in time for Samhain. If you want access to Shadow Seekers membership, which is the membership where we get deeper into our shadow work and our energy work, we work on building our intuition and kind of releasing our blockages that help us help us move more forward with our spiritual evolution. If you want to join that sooner than later, just reach out to me. We're never going to turn anyone away while we're working on the websites, but there will be a big unveiling coming soon. Same with the course. Demystifying Witchcraft is the foundational course. It takes you through all the different things like writing spells, casting circles, working with lunar cycles, working with other planetary energies, working with elements, deities, etc. So reach out if you want access to either of those, and I'll get you the information. You can decide if it's the right fit for you, and then look forward to in the future for the big unveiling of all the things that are coming. So I don't see anyone. Glitter said, "Yay, yay, yay! Join, join, join." Yeah, there's a lot of great people in our Shadow Seekers membership and in that course as well. Okay, I'm going to let you go for now. Maybe I will see you next week live. If I don't see you next week live, though, I'm doing a bunch of videos while I'm out in Boston, and I'll be posting those on the Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel. Speaking of, don't forget, if you are not already a subscriber, make sure to subscribe to our Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel. And that way you won't miss any future episodes. Leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere here in this episode, and that will help us get this out to more people. And then last but not least, I'm going to just drop a link in the chat in case you are not on our mailing list and you would like to go ahead and sign up at this link, and then it will also send you a free copy of The Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. All right, happy full moon, happy lunar eclipse, and until next time, blessed be.